Most moviegoers imagine that once a film reaches a theater, its fate is sealed. The lights go down, the projector hums, and the story unfolds exactly as the studio intended. But in the deeper, quieter corners of Hollywood, there exists a different kind of release, one marked by sudden reversals, unexplained withdrawals, and movies that vanish almost as soon as they appear. These aren't the casualties of scandal, public outrage, or box office catastrophes. They're titles that slip into the world for a moment, then are quietly pulled back, as if someone behind the scenes decided the audience wasn't meant to see them after all. Across decades of action filmmaking, a pattern emerges if you know where to look. Films that debut on a Friday night only to have their showings canceled before Monday arrives. Posters that are delivered and displayed, only to be taken down days later. Theater managers reporting late-night phone calls instructing them to remove a title without explanation. In many cases, no official statement is ever issued. No clarification. No apology. Only an absence. One that feels deliberate, strategic, and wrapped in silence. Some of these disappearances can be traced to frantic negotiations over distribution rights. Others may be tied to financial collapses, rebranded productions, or disagreements so severe that the studio chooses erasure over embarrassment. And then there are the cases that defy even those explanations, films that vanish for reasons no one has ever been willing to confirm. The result is a collection of action movies whose theatrical lives are less like releases and more like fleeting anomalies, flickering briefly before being swallowed by the system itself. Tonight, we're stepping into that shadowed archive. We're opening the files on theatrical releases that barely existed, movies that left behind more questions than audiences, and stories that hint at buried decisions made far from the public eye. These are the action films that were pulled from theaters without explanation, ghosts of the big screen that Hollywood would rather forget. Fact 1. Liberty and Bash, 1989. The arrival of Liberty and Bash in theaters was so understated that many regions didn't even realize it had premiered before it was already gone. The production had been unstable from the start, conflicting visions from producers, scenes rewritten on the fly, and reshoots that stretched the budget thin. By the time the film was finally shipped to exhibitors, confidence in its marketability had been reduced to a whisper. But the real story wasn't the film's rocky creation. It was how fast it vanished. Within mere days of its debut, theaters reported abrupt instructions to pull the title. No formal recall was issued. No technical explanation offered. Showtimes disappeared from listings overnight. Some exhibitors speculated that the studio feared publicly documented financial failure during an already tense negotiation period. Others believed that contractual obligations tied to theatrical revenue made the studio desperate to minimize exposure before losses could mount. What remains is a film whose presence on the big screen feels more like a rumor than an event, a theatrical moment that evaporated before it could find even a small audience. Fact 2. Chain of Command 1994. For a Michael Dudikoff action feature to vanish almost immediately after release was practically unheard of in the 90 seconds. Yet that's exactly what happened with Chain of Command. Promotional efforts were inconsistent from the outset. Posters shipped late, trailers seldom played, and schedules were altered so frequently that many theaters didn't know if the film was coming or going. In some cities, it appeared in listings for a day before being replaced without notice. Behind the scenes, industry chatter pointed toward extremely tense negotiations between the international rights holders and the domestic distributor. A dispute over territorial control may have triggered sudden recalls, effectively nullifying the theatrical rollout before audiences even had the chance to buy a ticket. Other sources speculated that the studio shifted its strategy as soon as early attendance numbers hinted at weak performance, opting to redirect the film into the home video market, where Dudikoff's name still guaranteed strong returns. Whatever the cause, the theatrical run was so fleeting that it left behind little more than unanswered questions. Fact 3. Steel Justice. Omianoa sute obcech. She shopped. Positioned as a gritty revenge thriller, Steel Justice had all the ingredients of a modest action hit an established genre actor, a pulpy storyline, and a marketing campaign ready to ride the wave of 80 seconds action fever. Yet despite this setup, its theatrical life collapsed almost instantly. Reports surfaced of screenings canceled midweek, showtimes quietly removed, and entire regions where the film was advertised but never actually played. Insiders claimed the studio grew anxious after disastrous test screenings suggested the film could damage their slate of upcoming releases. Rather than risk negative press or critical backlash, executives allegedly opted for a quiet retreat, hastily shrinking the rollout and pulling prints from theaters in near silence. Another theory pointed to corporate restructuring. Budgets were slashed, departments reorganized, and low-priority films like Steel Justice simply didn't survive the transition. By the time the dust settled, the movie's theatrical footprint was so small that it became one of those titles people vaguely remember hearing about but never actually saw on the big screen. Fact 4. Stickfighter 1994. Stickfighter entered theaters with almost no fanfare, but the speed at which it disappeared made its release feel more like a clerical error than a planned distribution. Some theaters reported screening it for only a handful of showings before being told quietly and without justification to remove it from their lineup. In other regions, the movie never even made it to the projector, despite posters and booking confirmations already in place. The silence around its withdrawal created the sense that the film had slipped out of existence before anyone noticed it was there. Behind the scenes, there were whispers about inconsistent film prints leading to projection issues during early screenings. Others suggested the studio may have realized, at the very last minute, that promoting the movie could do more harm than good, especially as the VHS market was booming and offered a safer financial outcome. Whatever the underlying reason, Stickfighter became one of those titles whose theatrical life felt like a shadow visible for a moment, then gone, leaving only fragments of evidence that it ever graced the big screen. Fact 5. The Base, 1999. On paper, The Base had everything needed for a straightforward limited theatrical release. A recognizable action lead, a marketable military theme, and a clear promotional angle. But the film's time in theaters dissolved with startling speed. Some cinemas were told to pull the movie before the opening weekend was over. Others saw it vanish with no instruction beyond a brief message from the distributor, offering no context and no public-facing explanation. The recall was executed so quietly that even staff members were unsure why the film had been removed. Industry rumors pointed toward unresolved legal complications surrounding the film's story rights issues that may have escalated at precisely the wrong moment. A competing theory suggested that early box office projections were far below expectations, prompting the distributor to retreat before losses expanded. Regardless of which version is true, the outcome was the same. The Base was swept off screens almost immediately, reappearing shortly thereafter in the home video space, as though that had been the intended destination all along. Fact 6. Diplomatic Siege, 1999. With Peter Weller and Daryl Hannah headlining, Diplomatic Siege seemed like the kind of mid-budget thriller that could at least secure a modest theatrical run. Instead, its release was marked by confusion and abrupt cancellations. In some territories, the movie debuted for only a single weekend. In others, it was listed in schedules but never shown, with exhibitors later saying they were instructed to send the reels back before opening night. No explanation was attached, only a directive. The absence of official commentary left the disappearance feeling intentional and strangely urgent. Insiders hinted that the root of the issue lay in a battle over the film's final cut. Producers and the studio reportedly disagreed on which version should reach theaters, and neither side was willing to compromise. Pulling the film prevented either party from taking the public blame for a flawed release. Instead, the movie was quietly shifted to the video market, where fewer eyes and fewer critics would scrutinize it. The result was a theatrical presence so faint that most viewers never realized the film had been scheduled for the big screen at all. Fact 2. Detention, Todesinde, Autre. Detention, led by Dolph Lundgren in a role tailor-made for his tough, stoic persona, should have secured at least a standard limited theatrical run. Instead, it became one of the strangest, near-invisible releases of the early 2000s. In several regions, theaters reported that the film appeared on internal schedules, but by the time the weekend arrived, showings had been canceled without warning. Other cinemas played it briefly, only to receive sudden instructions to halt screenings before the first full week concluded. Audiences who managed to catch it during this narrow window became part of a small, accidental club. Rumors circulated that the theatrical run existed solely to satisfy contractual requirements for overseas licensing. Once those obligations were technically fulfilled, there was little incentive for the distributor to maintain the release. Another theory pointed to disastrous early audience reactions, with early viewers offering feedback so negative that executives panicked, opting to bury the rollout before damaging word of mouth could take root. Whatever the truth, detention left behind a theatrical footprint so faint it felt like a glitch, something that happened in record only, not in reality. Fact 8. Deadly Prey, 1987. Today, regarded as a cult phenomenon, Deadly Prey originally stumbled into theaters like a film already destined for obscurity. Its release pattern was chaotic from the start. Local newspapers advertised a limited run, yet by mid-week, the movie vanished from listings with no explanation. Several theater managers claimed they were told to discontinue screenings immediately, while others insisted they never received complete reels to begin with, forcing last-minute schedule changes that left audiences confused. Behind these inconsistencies lay a much larger problem: the production company's precarious financial state. Industry insiders whispered that the distributor simply lacked the resources to keep the film on screens once attendance fell below even minimal projections. Pulling the movie early prevented additional expenses from accumulating an emergency measure dressed as a quiet retreat. The result was a release so disjointed and abbreviated that it barely qualified as theatrical, turning Deadly Prey into one of the decade's most elusive action films. Fact 9. American Ninja V. 1997. As part of a recognizable franchise, American Ninja 5 should have benefited from built-in fan interest. Yet its theatrical rollout was one of the most fragmented in the entire series. In some regions, showtimes appeared and vanished before the film ever played. In others, the movie screened for a day or two, then was abruptly pulled without context. Some theaters received marketing materials but no film print. Others received a print but never had the chance to show it. The scattered nature of the release made it nearly impossible for fans to track the movie down. Industry whispers suggested a surprising twist. American Ninja 5 was reportedly never meant to be part of the franchise. The film was allegedly rebranded late in production to capitalize on name recognition. This last-minute transformation may have triggered licensing conflicts between rights holders, prompting the studio to retreat until paperwork could be resolved, or quietly pulling the film altogether to avoid drawing legal scrutiny. Ultimately, the movie was shunted to the home video market, where it found an audience, leaving behind a theatrical history so faint that many longtime fans still debate whether it truly reached cinemas at all. Fact 10. Rapid Fire, 1992. Although Rapid Fire later earned a loyal following as one of Brandon Lee's standout roles, its theatrical rollout was far less stable than its eventual reputation suggests. In several regions, the film appeared briefly, sometimes for only a handful of screenings, before vanishing from schedules without warning. Theater managers reported sudden cancellations and unexplained replacements, leaving many puzzled as to why a film with clear commercial potential was being pushed out the door before it had a chance to breathe. Some industry insiders attributed the abrupt withdrawals to internal unease at the studio. With Lee's rising profile and the delicate public conversation surrounding his career, executives may have been wary of any complications or negative attention. Others speculated that the turmoil stemmed from disagreements between domestic and international distributors over marketing responsibilities, creating a fractured release strategy that led to premature removals. Whatever the reason, Rapid Fire endured a rollout as uneven as it was brief, leaving behind a theatrical trace that barely reflected its long-term cultural impact. Fact 11. Extreme Justice, 1993. Extreme Justice, featuring Lou Diamond Phillips and Scott Glenn, was built around a dark, provocative premise, an undercover police unit operating outside legal boundaries. Its themes were bold, even confrontational, especially given the socio-political climate of the early 90 seconds. Yet the movie's theatrical release barely materialized. In some cities, it opened quietly only to be pulled within days. In others, posters arrived, but the film never screened at all, as though the release itself had been second-guessed at the last moment. Whispers within the industry suggested that the studio grew nervous about how the public might react to the movie's portrayal of law enforcement. With real-world controversies dominating headlines, executives feared that releasing a film centered on rogue police tactics could ignite criticism they weren't prepared to confront. Faced with the possibility of backlash, the studio allegedly chose the safest path. Withdraw the film without fanfare, then quietly redirect it to cable and home video. The result was a theatrical life so truncated that it bordered on the invisible. Fact 12. Martial Outlaw, 1993. Jeff Wincott's popularity in the martial arts video market made Martial Outlaw a natural candidate for at least a modest theatrical push. Instead, its release became a patchwork of fleeting showings, canceled screenings, and incomplete deliveries. Some theaters reported receiving the film late. Others said reels arrived in such poor condition that projection was impossible. A few exhibitors claimed they were instructed to stop showing the movie almost immediately, with no explanation forthcoming from the distributor. Behind the curtain, it seemed the distributor was facing financial turmoil, leaving them unable to support even a minimal release. Reports indicated unpaid booking fees, cut marketing budgets, and internal disagreements over which version of the film should be sent out. This chaos translated directly into its vanishing act. Before the film could generate buzz, positive or negative, it was effectively gone. What remained was a release so brief and fragmented that Martial Outlaw became one more action title whose theatrical debut passed by unnoticed. Fact 13. Hollow Point, 1996. Despite boasting a cast that included Thomas Ian Griffith and Donald Sutherland, Hollow Point never enjoyed the theatrical presence its talent suggested. In many regions, the film appeared briefly, sometimes for a weekend, sometimes for a single evening before it was quietly pulled from circulation. Exhibitors recalled receiving promotional materials weeks in advance, only to be told at the last minute that screenings were being canceled or replaced. For audiences, the film's release felt more like a rumor than a genuine rollout. Industry insiders later pointed to financial tension within the film's distribution company. With several larger titles competing for resources, mid-tier action films like Hollow Point were the first to be sacrificed. Some even speculated that rival studios exerted pressure on exhibitors, pushing smaller releases out to secure more screens for upcoming blockbusters. In the ensuing reshuffle, Hollow Point simply vanished, another victim of marketplace politics, erased before it had the chance to reach the audience it deserved. Fact 14. U.S. Seals, 2000. U.S. Seals entered the action landscape at a time when military thrillers were drawing renewed interest, yet its theatrical run was so brief that many assumed it bypassed cinemas entirely. Reports from different regions varied wildly. Some theaters screened it once or twice before receiving abrupt instructions to remove it, while others listed the film in their schedules but never received a playable print. The inconsistency only fueled suspicion that something had gone wrong behind the scenes. Rumors soon circulated that certain sequences in the film bore too close a resemblance to material from another international production. Whether these similarities raised legal concerns or merely prompted internal panic, the distributor's response was swift and silent. They pulled the film before any potential controversy could grow. Afterward, U.S. Seals was pushed almost immediately into the home video market, where it found a modest audience, leaving behind a theatrical legacy that was little more than a trace. Fact 15. The Silencers, 1996. Blending action and sci-fi conspiracy, The Silencers promised a unique hybrid that could appeal to fans of both genres. Yet its theatrical release became one of the most fleeting of the decade. Some exhibitors received the film prints only to be told before opening night to return them. Others managed a short run before showtimes were deleted midweek, replaced with more reliable studio titles. Despite marketing materials being widely distributed, the film itself barely reached the screen. Sources close to the production described deep disagreements between creative leadership and studio executives. There were unresolved debates over tone, pacing, and genre identity. Was it meant to be a gritty action film or a campy sci-fi thriller? With confidence eroding and the risk of negative reception looming, the studio chose the quietest path: withdraw the movie before crowds could gather. What resulted was a release so fragmented and vaporous that many viewers believed it skipped theaters entirely, cementing The Silencers as one of the era's great vanishing acts. Bonus fact: executive decision, 1996. Long before Executive Decision settled into its reputation as a polished studio thriller, the film passed through a strange, almost unrecorded chapter during its earliest preview engagements. In a handful of select markets, the movie premiered on a Friday evening with all the confidence of a major release-packed cast, high production value, and a marketing machine gearing up for national rollout. Yet within 24 hours, something unprecedented happened. Theaters received quiet, urgent instructions to halt all further showings and prepare the prints for immediate return. No reason was offered. No technical note. No replacement timeline. Just silence. Audiences who attended those first screenings unknowingly witnessed a version of the film that disappeared almost instantly. When new prints arrived days later, subtle changes were evident: trimmed dialogue, tightened pacing, and adjusted sequences that suggested a last-minute internal scramble. Some insiders whispered that government consultants reviewing the film flagged inaccuracies related to military operations, forcing the studio to make emergency edits. Others believed the recall stemmed from continuity errors or a flawed early audio master that affected select preview copies. None of these theories were ever confirmed. What makes the event even more peculiar is the scale of the film. This wasn't a low-budget action title struggling to stay afloat. It was a high-stakes studio picture, one that studios typically guard with precision. For it to be withdrawn, revised, and quietly redistributed speaks to a behind-the-scenes urgency that the studio never acknowledged. The entire incident left behind almost no official documentation. But among those who were there in the right place at the right moment, the memory lingers. A version of Executive Decision that flickered briefly across a small handful of screens before being replaced, leaving behind a whisper of a mystery that still hasn't been fully explained. After exploring these disappeared releases, films that slipped into theaters only to be erased before they ever found an audience, you've now stepped into a corner of Hollywood that rarely sees daylight. Each title carries a shadow of decisions made in silence, choices that reshaped their destinies without a single public explanation. These vanishings leave behind traces, questions, and mysteries that echo far beyond their brief moments on the big screen. So now it's your turn. Which story struck you the hardest? Which disappearance felt intentional, and which felt like a mistake buried too quickly to question? And more importantly, what other forgotten corners of action cinema should we dig into next? Tell us your theories, your discoveries, your suspicions. We'll be here, ready to open the next sealed file.